Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about code. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, I've heard developers say that code is a cost and a liability and not an asset. Would you agree? To a point, I would say that it's both. It's sort of, you can think of it sort of as owning guns. A owning a or not necessarily it does I mean it doesn't have to be a gun, it can be something valuable or something like that. Let's say that you have a lot of fancy jewelry or something like that, so the that is both a liability and an asset, because the value of the jewelry or like whatever you have is your asset, but it's also increasing the likelihood that someone's going to steal it from you, for example. Same thing, if you have a gun, statistics shows that you're more likely to actually use it than if you don't have it, etc., etc. So it really depends on the context. It's the same thing with software. So the more like if you have a very well working system, like the code that you write has producing some type of value, that is your asset. But the more code you have, the harder it is to change things, and it's also a liability, because the more code there is, the more likely you are to have bugs, the harder it is on the software developers to understand what's going on in the code. And if we think about security, the larger your surface of IT solutions, the more likely hackers and penetration testers, hackers, let's just say hackers, and malicious actors are to get into your landscape and actually do some really serious damage to your companies, especially now that most companies are becoming digital. So I would say that you can think of code as a liability and as an asset it's equal measures, right? So what I like to say to software developers and I used to not really understand this when I was in school, I even remember it so well that I reference it in my mind whenever I start thinking about, wow, it would be really cool if I could make this thing. Like, when I indulge the philosopher in me a little bit too much, and because when you work for a while, you start to see the pattern. Okay, if I do A, I know that B is going to happen, and then C is going to happen, and then you start to, thinking that you're really clever, and then you go, yeah, I've been in the game so long that I know that D and F and like all of this other stuff is also going to happen. So you start preparing, you get to indulging yourself, and you start writing code that is going to be quote unquote right for the situation in 6 months, but not here and now. When you could have just done, or you said, all right, I'm just going to do the things that are right for the moment, and make sure that I know that when it's time to take the next step and make the next iteration, I am in a state where I remember what I was doing. I know that if you can even add some documentation if you wanted to, or train people to know that, okay, this is where we are right now. This is probably where we're heading. So the way we want to write these systems is this way, and put them in this state, so that when step number 2 comes, we can just continue as is, and this becomes our first layer of functionality, and then we're going to add layer number 2, layer number 3, rather than creating one super layer that just has everything from day one. And the reason why I believe that that is the way to go is because the ideal way, in my opinion, to think about code is to think of it as a weight, like a brick of gold or something like that, where your intention is to take all this value that you have, like all this gold, or if you have a sack full of money or whatever, right, and run it across the finish line. Now the problem is if you put too much in the backpack, you are going to slow down getting to the finish line. And if it's too heavy, you're not going to be able to move anywhere, and you're never going to get to the finish line. You're never going to be able to ship anything or actually, get the benefits of that money. But let's just pretend that you can't use it until you finish the race or whatever. And so the ideal thing is to find how much can I carry, like how much code can I have in proportion to the value that I get from it. Because the goal is sort of in a sense like strength training and fitness as well. The goal is to have the lowest amount of body fat to muscle ratio. Same thing here. You want maximum value for minimum amount of code. The perfect program is the program, quote unquote, that you don't have to write and you just get paid to do nothing. And the next best program is a Hello World application that people pay you billions for. Same deal, right? Don't write code for the sake of writing code. Only write code that you have to have in order to ship the value. As I said, only add as much money to your backpack or goal or whatever as you can carry across the finish line in a reasonable amount of time, because then there's going to be another race and you can repeat the process all over again, because if you have too much, you're never even going to finish race number 1. So what I want you to take away from this is that yes, you can think about code as I don't think you should think about code as a liability exclusively. I think you should, as I said, think about it as both at the same time, where the goal is to have a balance between how much code you have and how much value you're getting from it. If you ever get to a point, which is something that happens as well, guys, you know you're in trouble when your systems have to work a certain way and you're forcing the users of your systems to do things that they don't really want to do, because your system is built in a way that you can makes it difficult for you to do anything else. As I like to say, if a feature is difficult to add, it's usually an indicator that something isn't really right with the architecture, because the goal is for digital solutions to make human life easier. If it's not making human life easier, you should start asking why. And that's usually when you have gotten to that point where you have more code than you get value from the code. And that is usually not a good ratio. You want, as I said, the least amount of code for the most amount of value. So think of it as emission standards. Take the car that has the lowest fuel consumption. That's the best car in programming world. Have a great day.